The unjust firing. It was a Thursday morning in Modesto, California, the kind of morning where the sun was already burning through your shirt by 9 a.m. and the concrete smelled like heat. Donell Cooper had been at Vince's custom cycles for almost a decade and a half, and he still showed up early every single day. Same thermos of coffee, same black boots, same quiet nod to whoever clocked in after him. Donell wasn't flashy, he didn't brag, didn't need to. You don't survive this long in a bike shop unless your hands know what they're doing, and his did. He could pull apart a carburetor blindfolded and tell you if the engine was burning too lean just by the sound it made when you hit the throttle. That morning, Vince barked out an order across the garage. "Donell, you're up front. Walk in, rear belt shredded." Donell wiped his hands on a rag and walked out toward the open bay door. That's when he saw it, a 2005 Harley Dyna Super Glide, dirty, loud, and mean-looking, just the way riders liked them. But it wasn't the bike that truly caught his attention. It was the patch on the man's cut-off denim vest. A red and white Hells Angels rocker stretched across the back with a small Modesto chapter tag at the bottom. Donell wasn't new to this. He'd fixed bikes for all types, retired sheriffs, fresh out of jail parolees, weekend warriors, real riders. He didn't ask questions, didn't need the answers to. If you had cash or a card that cleared, you were a customer, period. The rider was white, maybe late 40s, with deep-set eyes, weathered skin, and tattoos crawling up both arms. "You Donell?" the guy asked, his voice gravelly. "That's me." Guy out back said, "You're the only one who really knows what the hell he's doing around here." Donell gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. "Depends what you're trying to get done." The rider kicked out the stand and gave a half shrug. Belt snapped on the way in. "She's spitting and popping too, maybe timing's off." Donell crouched beside the bike, already eyeing the damage. "You ride it like you stole it." The guy chuckled. "Is there any other way?" And just like that, it was on. Donell rolled the bike inside, started the inspection. They talked a little small stuff, engine mods, preferred oils, what tires held up best in Cali heat. Nothing personal. The guy's name was Royce, he didn't offer a last name, and Donell didn't push. They shared a mutual respect. Riders and mechanics understand each other on a different level. It's about trust. You trust the person under your bike not to mess you up when you're doing 90 down I-5. After about an hour, Donell had replaced the belt, tuned the timing, tightened the chain, and cleaned the air filter just for good measure. Royce grinned. "Feels better already, and I ain't even sat on her." Donell smirked. "She'll hold up, just don't ride her like you're invincible." Royce held out a calloused hand. "Appreciate it, man. You know, people don't always treat us right. You didn't flinch. You just did the work." Donell shook his hand, the grip firm. "I fix bikes. I don't fix people." The moment felt genuine. Two men from completely different worlds connected by grease, gas, and grit. Donell watched as Royce peeled out of the lot, engine growling like a dog off its leash. But someone else had been watching too. A co-worker, Zack, a young guy Donell knew, thought he was slick, thought he was funny. He took a photo on his phone while Donell worked on Royce's bike, captioning it, "Guess who's patching up the angels today?" He didn't show Donell, didn't tell Vince. He just tossed it on his private Instagram, thinking it'd get a few laughs. But that post, that one photo, it was about to turn Donell's entire life upside down. By the next morning, Donell noticed the energy in the shop felt off. Not loud, not tense, just different. Fewer hellos, less eye contact, like folks were watching him but nobody wanted to admit it. He brushed it off at first. Maybe it was the heat, maybe people were just tired. But when Vince walked past him in the bay without even a nod, Donell knew something wasn't right. During lunch, he sat alone on the old bench out back, like he always did. He was halfway through his sandwich when Zack came out, phone in hand, snickering. "Yo, Coop." Zack called out. "You see the comments on my story yesterday?" Donell looked up, slow. "What story?" Zack turned the screen so Donell could see. There it was, a photo of him crouched beside Royce's bike, the Hells Angels patch clearly in frame. The caption read, "Donell switching teams, Guess we got to start calling him Big Red. Underneath were a dozen comments. Yo, he in deep now. Ain't that shop affiliated with the Vagos? Watch him start rolling with the crew. Donell's chest tightened. He stood slowly. You posted this. Zack shrugged like it was nothing. It's a joke, man, don't be so serious. Everyone knows it ain't real. But the damage was already done. That afternoon, a customer who'd been waiting on a tire install asked for a different mechanic, said he'd come back next week if Donell wasn't available. Another guy stood at the front counter whispering to the receptionist, eyeing Donell like he had a grenade in his back pocket. And Vince still hadn't said a word. Donell knew how fast stuff like this could spin. You don't need to say much in a place like Modesto. One bad look, one half-truth story, and suddenly, you're not the guy who fixes bikes, you're the guy they whisper about in the break room. By the end of the shift, Donell had had enough. He walked straight into Vince's office, wiped sweat from his forehead, and shut the door behind him. You got a minute? He asked. Vince didn't look up from his desk. You working on that Buell? I was. Now I'm here. Vince leaned back, arms crossed. All right, what's on your mind? That picture. The one Zack posted. Vince's jaw worked like he was chewing words before spitting them out. You got a lot of nerve bringing that to me, Donell. Donell blinked. Come again. You think I like getting calls from old customers asking if we're working with outlaw clubs now? You think that's good for business? I fixed a man's bike. That's all I did. You know that. You fixed his bike in front of God and everybody with a smile on your face. Donell stepped forward, fists clenched at his sides. So what? You telling me we're turning people away based on what jacket they wear now? Vince stood up slowly. I'm telling you this ain't a good look for you or for us. But you didn't have a problem with the skinhead whose Triumph I worked on last month. You didn't care when that dude with the Confederate flag keychain dropped off his Honda. So why now? Vince didn't answer. That silence told Donell everything he needed to know. But before he could walk out of that office, Vince said something that stopped him cold. Donell, Vince said, his voice low, almost flat, I'm letting you go. Just like that. No warning, no sit-down, no final write-up or probation. 15 years gone in 5 words. Donell blinked hard. He wasn't even sure he heard it right. You're firing me for what? Vince looked down at his desk, like the paperwork might give him the courage he didn't have in his own spine. It's not a good fit anymore. A good fit. Donell's voice cracked. I trained half the guys in that shop. I've stayed late, worked holidays, took pay cuts when you asked. Now I'm not a good fit. Vince avoided his eyes. This isn't personal. Everything about it is personal. The room felt small, airless. Donell's ears were ringing. He couldn't tell if it was heat or anger or just disbelief. You know what this is, he said, his voice low now, cutting through the ringing. It ain't about no damn photo. You're afraid of what people think, not what's real. Vince didn't deny it. Didn't even try. He reached into a drawer, pulled out a thin envelope, and slid it across the desk. Final check plus your vacation hours. Donell didn't touch it. You ever think what kind of message this sends? He asked, his gaze unwavering. To everyone else. To the young cats in that shop watching how you treat people. Vince finally looked up, his expression weary. I'm thinking about keeping my doors open, Donell. That's what I'm thinking about. Donell stared at him for a long second, then turned and walked out without a word. The sound of the office door clicking shut behind him felt louder than any argument. The shop was quieter than usual. He could feel eyes on him, some curious, some guilty, some pretending they hadn't heard the shouting. Zack was in the corner, pretending to refill the coolant shelf, but he wouldn't meet Donell's gaze. Back at his station, Donell opened his drawer, pulled out his toolbox key, and unlocked the chest he'd been filling for 15 years. Socket by socket, wrench by wrench, all paid for with honest labor. He packed slow, deliberate, no rush, like he wanted every person in that building to watch him leave and remember it. On his way out, he stopped at the time clock, clocked out for the last time. Didn't say a word. Outside, The heat hit him like a slap. He sat behind the wheel of his old Silverado and just stared at the dash. Everything was quiet except the ticking sound the engine made when it cooled down. His phone buzzed, a text, unknown number. Heard what happened? That was wrong, bro. I'm sorry. No name, no courage. He tossed the phone on the seat. That night, he didn't sleep. Just lay there staring at the ceiling fan spin slow overhead, thinking about how fast a man's reputation could be taken away. Not because of what he did, but because of what other people thought he did. 15 years of work, loyalty, and sweat erased by one photo and a handful of scared whispers. But he wasn't broken. He was angry. And underneath that anger, something else was building, resolve. Because if he didn't find out who really started this, he'd never be able to clear his name. And he wasn't about to let a joke ruin his life. The next day, Donell woke up early, out of habit. His body still moved like it had a shift to start. Coffee, shower, work boots. But this time, there was no place to be. He sat on the edge of the bed for a while, staring at his calloused hands, the tools of a trade he'd mastered only to have it snatched away. His phone buzzed again, another message from an old coworker. Man, that was messed up. You good? He didn't answer. Instead, he grabbed his keys, loaded his toolbox into the truck bed, and headed into town, not for a job yet, but just to move, to think, to keep from sitting in that suffocating silence. He stopped by Skip's Auto, a family-owned garage on the south end of Modesto. Skip was old school, white, in his 60s, with a gut and a limp, but he never treated Donell like anything less than a man. They'd done some side work together over the years, shared a beer once or twice at a cookout. Skip spotted him pulling in and walked out, wiping his hands on a greasy towel. You look like you just buried someone, he said, his voice gruff but kind. Just got fired for doing my job, Donell replied, the words tasting bitter. Skip raised an eyebrow. Heard some rumblings about that. Something about a biker. Donell nodded. Guy from the Hells Angels walked in, needed help. I fixed his bike. That's it. Skip shook his head slowly. Let me guess. Some punk took a picture. It got twisted up, and Vince folded like a lawn chair. That about sums it up. They stood there for a beat, Skip leaning against the door frame, squinting at the street. I hate to say it, he said finally, but I've seen this movie before. You're black, and he was a white biker with a reputation. People start assuming things. Nobody wants the heat. They let you take the fall. Donell didn't say anything. He didn't have to. The truth had already been spoken, a cold, sharp echo of what he already suspected. You need anything? Skip asked, his eyes filled with genuine concern. Money. Work. Appreciate it, Donell said, his voice tight. But I'm not done with this yet. That night, Donell sat at the kitchen table, staring at the photo Zack had posted. It was still up, dozens more comments now. A few were jokes, but others weren't. One of them said, so Vince's shop is doing business with gang members now. Another, I always knew something was off about that dude. He clicked through the usernames, local folks, people he'd seen around town, people who gossiped in grocery store aisles. And then, he found one that made his stomach turn, at Reeves Body Paint 209. It was a rival shop across town, and they weren't subtle. The caption on their repost read, Our team keeps it clean. No gangs, no questions. That's when Donell understood. This wasn't just some prank gone wrong. This was calculated. It was a weapon, used against him. There were people who wanted him out of the picture, and Vince. He didn't defend Donell, didn't correct the story. He just let the narrative run wild, let people think what they wanted if it meant protecting his image. Donell opened his notebook. He started writing down names, dates, comments, anyone who had shared or reposted that image. He wasn't planning revenge. He was building the truth, step by painstaking step. And as he sat there, collecting the threads, a knock hit the front door. Heavy. Twice. Donell stood up slowly, the silence in the house amplifying the sound. He opened it. Standing on the porch, wearing the same vest as before, was Royce, the Hells Angels rider. I heard what happened, he said. Donell didn't answer, just studied the man's face. Royce looked him in the eye, no judgment, just a quiet intensity. Mind if I come in? Donell stepped back, just enough for Royce to come in. He didn't say welcome, didn't need to. The room was quiet except for the buzz of the old refrigerator. Royce looked around, his gaze lingering on the family photos on the wall, the tools on the kitchen table, the lingering smell of fresh coffee. He looked as if he hadn't expected it to feel so normal, so lived in. I saw the post, Royce said finally, his voice low, almost a murmur. Didn't take long before it started getting around. Donell leaned against the wall, arms folded. Guess it doesn't matter what the truth is when the lie sounds better. Royce gave a curt nod. Yeah. People love a story. Don't care if it's real. Then he looked Donell straight in the face, his eyes piercing. You lost your job over that. Donell gave a short, bitter breath. Fired. The next day. No discussion, just bad optics and a final check. Royce's jaw clenched. You ever stopped to ask who wanted that to happen? That got Donell's attention. He pushed off the wall. What do you mean? Royce sat down across from him at the table, pulled out his phone, and scrolled through some messages. There's a guy I know from back in the day. Body shop near the freeway. Name's Trevor Baines. Used to ride. Used to talk big. Never patched in. Always wanted to be affiliated, but nobody trusted him. Reeves body paint, Donell said, the pieces already clicking into place, a cold clarity settling over him. Yeah, that's him. I heard he's been trying to run Vince out for years. Kept saying the shop was losing authentic riders. This was his shot. All he needed was a crack. Royce looked at Donell, his expression grim. Donell stared at the table, feeling the weight of it. So he took a photo that wasn't his, spun a lie, and spread it to cut Vince off at the knees. Royce nodded. He reached out to a guy I know, asked if I was doing business with your shop. Told him I dropped my bike off. Next thing I know, he's reposting your photo and talking like I'm your blood brother. Donell let that sit for a second, the magnitude of the setup sinking in. Why are you telling me this? Royce stood up, his voice hardening slightly. Because you didn't judge me. I walked in wearing that patch, and you treated me like a man. That matters more than you think. Donell followed him to the door, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. Royce paused before stepping out. You get the truth straight. Let me know. I don't mind setting the record right if that's what it takes. As the door shut behind him, Donell felt something shift. This wasn't just a misunderstanding anymore. It was a setup, a calculated one. And now, he knew exactly where to start. The next morning, he showed up at Vince's shop with a folder under his arm and a fire in his chest. He didn't go through the side door like he used to. He walked straight in the front and waited until Vince looked up from the register. What the hell are you doing here? Vince asked, his voice sharp with annoyance. Donell set the folder on the counter. This, he said, tapping the cover, is everything. Every repost, every comment, every message linked to that photo. Most of it tied back to Trevor Baines and Reeves body paint. He's been trying to squeeze you out for months. Vince's face shifted, a flicker of disbelief, but he said nothing. And the kid who took the picture, Zack? He's the one who handed it over. Might want to ask him how much Baines paid him. But what Vince did next, Donell never could have predicted. Vince stared at the folder, his hands resting on the counter as if he wasn't sure whether to pick it up or throw it in the trash. For a moment, he said nothing, just stood there, face tight, eyes flicking between the paperwork and Donell's face. Then he finally spoke. You saying Zack sold you out? That he was working with Baines? I'm saying you fired the wrong man, Donell replied, his voice flat. Vince opened the folder and flipped through the pages. There were screenshots, repost timestamps, comment logs. At the bottom, a printed message between Zack and a burner account, an account linked to a number used by Reeves body paint. Zack had sent the photo himself, Donell said. He sold it. Not for much, either. Couple hundred. That's all it took. Vince rubbed the back of his neck, his shoulders slumping. His voice dropped. I didn't know. You didn't want to know, Donell countered, his words hitting hard. Vince looked up, tired now, defeat etched on his face. You got to understand, Donell. People were calling, clients we've had for years. My rep was on the line. So you threw me under the bus. I made a call under pressure. Doesn't mean it was the right one. Donell nodded once, a slow, deliberate movement. No, it doesn't. Just then, the glass front door opened, and in walked Royce, vest on, boots muddy, sunglasses hanging from his shirt collar. Every eye in the room turned to him. He didn't wait for permission. He walked straight to the counter, stood next to Donell, and slapped down a small stack of glossy flyers. You'll want to know who I am. Royce said, his voice loud enough for the whole shop to hear, cutting through the silence like a knife. Name's Royce Benton. I ride with the Modesto chapter. Been clean since 2011. Run a halfway house for ex-cons out in series. That man, he pointed at Donell, treated me with more respect than half the businesses in this town. Fired him for working on my bike. That's coward work. Silence. Royce leaned in close to Vince, his voice low now, menacing. You know how many of your clients got family locked up? Folks that made mistakes but trying to do right? You going to fire them too when someone comes knocking? Vince didn't answer. Royce looked around the shop, then back at Donell. You let me know if you open your own spot. I'll bring every rider I know your way. He gave Donell a nod, solid, real, and walked out the door like he owned the place. Vince rubbed his face, sat down slowly behind the counter, and sighed. I messed up. Donell didn't argue. I can try to fix this, Vince said, looking up, a desperate plea in his eyes. Put a statement out. Talk to the press. You come back. We get ahead of it. But Donell was already shaking his head. I'm not coming back. Vince looked surprised. Why not? Because you didn't have my back when it mattered. And now that the smoke's clearing, you're just trying to protect your name. I can't work in a place where loyalty only goes one way. He picked up the folder, tucked it under his arm, and turned to leave. As he walked through the front door, he glanced over his shoulder one last time. You want to make this right, he said, his voice carrying. Start by telling the truth. Loud and clear. But Donell wasn't done yet, because if this town had turned its back on him, he was about to show them what rebuilding from nothing really looked like. The next week moved fast. Donell didn't sit still, he wasn't the type. Instead, he got to work, making calls, knocking on doors, shaking hands. He reached out to people who knew his name, who'd seen his work, who had bikes in their garages and no one they really trusted to touch them. One of the first to answer the call was Royce. He hadn't been bluffing when he said he'd bring riders. Word spread through the community. Black riders, Latino riders, even a few white guys who kept their politics quiet but their bikes loud. To them, a patch didn't matter. What mattered was honesty, skill, someone who didn't talk down or jack up prices just because you looked like you didn't belong. By Friday, Donell had 4 bikes in his driveway and a 5th being trailered in from Stockton. He wasn't waiting for a building. He started from his garage. A folding table, a jacklift, his old tools, and a plastic bin for parts. It was humble, but it worked, and it felt real. Then the story hit local news. Mechanic fired after helping biker. They didn't get everything right, but the core was there. Zack had leaked the photo, Reeves' body paint had spun it into a smear, and Vince, he gave a quote at the end, his voice shaky on the recording. I made the wrong call, he said. I let fear talk louder than facts. The phone started ringing. Some calls were from reporters, some from old clients who felt bad for staying quiet. A couple just said, "Man, we saw the news. That was wrong." And then there was the one that made Donell pause. It came from a woman named Charlene Morales, a retired parole officer. She ran a non-profit that helped formerly incarcerated individuals get back into the workforce. She said she had a few guys with tools and time but no one who'd give them a shot. You build something, she said, her voice clear and strong. We'll send you work. Good men just need a break. Donell sat in silence after that call, not because he didn't know what to say, but because for the first time in days, the bitterness started to lift. That weekend, He called in a favor from Skip, borrowing a small corner of the old junkyard next to his lot. Skip said he'd help him pour concrete if it came to that, said the city owed him anyway for a mess they'd made years ago. They set up a tent, brought out work lights. A few guys showed up with their bikes and their stories. One of them was Marcus Bright, 39, fresh out after doing time for a bar fight that got out of hand. He'd been turned away from 2 shops that week. Donell handed him a wrench. "Ever pulled apart a primary?" he asked. Marcus grinned. "Not in a while, but I still remember." That moment mattered. This wasn't just about a job anymore. It was about giving people like Marcus a reason to show up, just like Donell used to do every morning at Vince's shop, long before a photo made him dangerous. Later that night, Donell updated the nameplate on the garage, Cooper's Rebuild and Repair. Underneath, painted in bold red, "No judgment, just work." The dust might have been thick and the tools old, but within those walls, a new kind of respect was being forged. Even with momentum building, there was still one last surprise waiting, something Donell never saw coming. The Monday after Cooper's Rebuild and Repair officially opened, a matte black Ford F-250 pulled into the gravel lot just after noon. Donell was under a Yamaha V-Star, wrench in hand, when he heard the door slam. He slid out from under the bike, wiped his hands on a rag, and looked up. It was Vince. No clipboard, no folder, just him, wearing jeans and a wrinkled shop tee, hands in his pockets. Donell didn't say anything, just waited. Vince looked around, his gaze lingering on the top-covered bikes, the tools on plastic shelves, a few riders sitting on folding chairs drinking from paper cups. Nothing fancy, but it felt alive. "You built this fast," Vince said, his voice quiet. "I didn't have time to waste," Donell replied flatly. Vince nodded slowly. "I came to say something. Maybe late, maybe it don't matter, but I'm going to say it anyway." Donell crossed his arms, but didn't stop him. "I got scared," Vince said, looking Donell in the eye. "Not of you, not really. I got scared of what people would say, the looks, the whispers. Thought I was protecting the shop, but I didn't protect the man who kept it running." Donell said nothing, his face unreadable. Vince took a breath. "You made that place better. I never told you that. I should have. And when all this happened, I should have stood next to you, not behind the door." Donell looked him in the eye, a direct, unwavering gaze. "You done?" Vince nodded. "Yeah." "Good. Then listen." Donell stepped forward, his voice low and cutting. "You didn't just fire me. You made it okay for everybody else to turn their backs. You made silence feel normal. That don't just disappear." "I know," Vince said, his shoulders slumping. "I won't ask you to come back. I wouldn't if I were you. I just wanted to say what I should have said before." He turned to leave, but paused. "You need anything? Tools? Lifts? Scrap parts? I mean it. It's yours." Then he walked back to his truck and drove off. Donell watched the taillights disappear, then looked back at the garage. Inside, Marcus was helping a teenager clean an air filter. Royce was leaning on a workbench, helping another rider patch a tire. And on the wall, someone had taped a handwritten sign, "Your past ain't a problem here. We just fix things." Later that week, Donell was sitting on his porch when an envelope arrived in the mail. No return address. Inside was a crisp note, handwritten, "You were done wrong. You didn't fold. Much respect. Enclosed is a token of support from those who ride." There was a check for $5,000, signed simply, Modesto Chapter. Donell sat there a long time, staring at it, not because of the money, but because of what it meant. The same patch that got him fired was now the reason his shop might grow. Funny how life works. By the end of the month, Cooper's was pulling in steady work. People who'd heard the story, people who respected the way he handled it, even riders who said they'd never trust anyone again until they met him. Donell didn't chase revenge, he chased purpose. And in doing that, he found something more valuable than any job ever gave him: his voice, his peace, his pride. He didn't have to shout. He let his work speak, and this time, everyone listened. Because reputation can be taken in a second, but respect, That's earned, rebuilt, and protected with every choice you make. Don't be the one who stays quiet when someone's being torn down. Speak truth, stand tall, and remember, silence can do more damage than hate ever could.